get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
And welcome in. We appreciate you dropping by on this Week 11 edition of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progrard, that's me. Happy to be joined, as always, by my longtime partner in crime, Phil Byrne. And Phil, I know I am kind of wanting to gravitate toward my roots a little bit, but I'm not going to because people are busy and they're probably a little irritated still from the other night, and they don't want me to go into whole sports update anchor mode of, did you know that the Lions lost 16-9 to the Philadelphia Eagles? No, nobody wants to hear that. So what can we do to kind of get this thing jump started here? Do we want to start with the offense? Do we want to touch on the defense? Talk about how the game was coached, the officiating?
Yeah.
What
Let's start with
start and branch out?
Let's start with Dan Campbell.
Okay, so we all know that Dan Campbell, since he's been the head coach, has chosen to go for it a significantly higher number of times than his contemporaries. So nothing new about that. And we kind of had a feeling that as certain situations came up, given the fact that there was also some weather that was going to be impacting the kicking game and what have you, would probably be seeing a handful of going for it on 4th down over the course of the game. So no major surprise. But what I was surprised about, Phil, is the plays that were drawn up, the point in the game in which they were attempted, and the point on the field in which these 4th downs were attempted. Are you kind of in the same boat as me?
A little bit here. Listen, this podcast would not be around if it wasn't for Dan Campbell taking the name of what it was. And I think the intensity and the passion and things like that helps spark the Lions to the success we've seen over the last handful of years. It's something to be proud of. It's something to embrace, something to champion. But this is the other side of the coin. When it goes so wrong, and you're trying to prove that you are more than a dome team, and you have no what's the word I'd be looking for here? So maybe like emotional intelligence to know that some of the play calls that you would call at Ford Field with no wind, with no elements, with no cold on the line, it's not the same play call. I think conversely too, like we don't have Frank Ragnow in the center anymore. We have a bottom third of the NFL starting center in Graham Glasgow. We had Coyote Iwasika. Who was the other guy they threw in there? Some backup when Ratledge went. This is not the same offensive line to go out guns a-blazing on every single 4th down, to never punt, to never kick a field goal. If we would have attempted some of these field goals, my God, Vince, yeah, the pass interference call, in which we'll get into when we talk about the officiating, is something to be said. But what an absolute letdown from the play calling game that we saw against the Commanders to whatever this was. And I can't help but think that this is the backlash of what happens when your head coach, who has, a million different responsibilities and duties and meetings and people reporting to, is also calling the plays. And the offensive coordinator who was called in to call the plays is just on a headset and isn't even really talking and is just looking at a play sheet and is just up in the booth and isn't doing anything. This is a Campbell and Morton issue that they got to realize what they've got in that offensive line. They got to get with Hank Fraley. They got to get this figured out, because none of the play calls in the situation and scenarios that were presented last night would say this is one where you got to keep going for it.
Yeah, so Jameer Gibbs up the middle on 4th and 1, the first attempt, just runs right into Jordan Davis's belly button. Okay, fine. There's your mulligan. Second one, this is where it starts to get really egregious here. You attempt a fake punt on your side of the field. Only one problem. And this is where, hey, you got John Morton up in the press box looking at things, supposedly on the headset, has the right to get on and call in on things he doesn't like. Did it occur to nobody that the Eagles had their defensive personnel out there in the field when this fake punt was about to be attempted? Okay, so
Yeah.
that's your first half. Now you get to the second half. The offense is at long last, after doing nothing in the first half. Now in the second half, the offense is finally starting to show a little bit of life on offense. You put together drives of 40-plus yards, 60-plus yards, 70-plus yards. The bulk of the offense from the game from a yardage standpoint took place in that third quarter. But they had 0 points to show for it because of just dreadful decision-making to attempt it on fourth and not so manageable, given the way the Eagles were playing that game on defense, given the way that by this point you should at least have this idea in your head that Jared Goff just isn't having it tonight. For whatever reason, Vic Fangio kind of seems to be his kryptonite of sorts, and it just isn't the right night to try and do some of this stuff. You can't call the game the same way as you would against a team with a junky defense in the Commanders like you did a week ago. You can't call the game the same way that you would have when a bottom third NFL team comes to Ford Field and you're playing it indoors out of the elements. And I feel like there is no room for negotiation of, hey, this isn't working, so let's try this. There's no contingency or backup plans. It's just let's go right back to the well and keep doing the same thing and anticipating that this is going to be the time that it actually works for us. And I think what makes it so frustrating is, given all that, I can't sit here on this podcast and tell you that Philadelphia played a great game or a game representative of the defending Super Bowl champions or a game representative of a team that's probably going to get the 1 seed in the NFC.
No, it was. I don't want to say Philadelphia was also lackluster, but that also looks like a team that has their own issues they've got to iron out. Clearly, they try to make a habit of getting A.J. Brown the ball. A lot of like weird third down plays that weren't even close. You know, they're not having their own success with Saquon Barkley that they did last year. Literally, his production has been cut in half. But the defense, all those Georgia guys that they've been drafting over the years, they tip passes. They got inside against the Lions' offensive line. They created pressure. Jalen Phillips, who they just traded for at the trade deadline, while the Lions sat pat and didn't add anyone, didn't acquire anyone, was able to, have a nice night, getting some pressure on Jared Goff. This is not the story of the 2025 Lions per se, but unless this starts to get corrected, unless they actually get on the same page with what the offensive line is going to be doing, how they're going to be attacking, how they're going to be moving, we're dead in the water. This is a team that cannot operate and cannot win when Jared Goff has to throw the ball 30 times in a game. This has always been a team that you establish the run, you get the play action moving, and then that is when the protection starts for Jared Goff. You get him comfortable in the pocket. And that's when he's had these games of 75% and higher pass completion.
And none of this is any surprise. We all fully know what Goff is capable of and what he needs and what we need out of the supporting cast, namely the offensive line, to set Goff up for the highest amount of success.
Yeah. So to me, I understand that offensive linemen don't get dealt very much in season at the trade deadline. They're kind of a commodity. But come on. what are the Tennessee Titans doing? Kevin Zeitler, to me, it would have made perfect sense. We didn't do anything. Even in the days after, I was waiting for a story to come out that maybe Titans decided to not, pick up the phone, or they were holding on to him or something like that. This offensive line, from Decker to Sewell, everyone has been banged up and hurt. And every single game, at least 2 starters are leaving to go to the blue tent to get checked out. This is not set up well. And while they're gritty enough to stay out there, or maybe miss a game or here, from here, but not consecutive games or anything like that. It's not a recipe for success when we have to run the ball.
Yeah, and
Because
let's take a broad view at it. Decker's over the hill. Awosika is a career backup. Glasgow is not an NFL center. Ratledge isn't ready yet, and Sewell can't do it all by himself. And like you pointed out, he's headed to the blue medical tent probably more times in the last 5-6 games than he ever has.
yeah, so then you compensate this by getting more tight ends in there. You bring, in some other linemen for relief purposes. Skipper, in some of these sets. But then we had the injury to Sam Laporta. So all of a sudden it's more on Brock Wright. We don't really have the personnel beyond him to feel comfortable about some of those guys on the field. And, you know, um, just a variety of nightmare kind of scenarios happening in this game. But for me, the onus is on when's enough enough. At some point in time, Dan Campbell has to be ushered out of the casino and say, no, sir, we're not going to allow you to gamble one more time here. Someone has to rein him in on some of these calls. I don't know who that is going to be. And I think the thing that's unfortunate is they have been beneficial in the past. So was this a scouting issue that they had? I'm looking at Philadelphia's defense and thinking, oh, a 50% Graham Glasgow is going to be enough to hold up against, whatever the Eagles counter up. And I think this coaching staff and this front office, sometimes with the way that they analyze the roster, they're way too high on their guys. That was a very, very talented Philadelphia Eagles team that was ripe for the picking. And any other team that would have played things a little bit more conservatively or had a little bit more protection could have easily went into Philadelphia last night and won. And that's why, as we're recording this, the Lions, if the playoffs started today, would be out of the playoffs. They'd be sitting at home.
And conversely, if that's a game that you win, you are sitting here listening to this podcast as the number 2 team in the NFC. So that's a pretty big spectrum just of how a 60-minute football game unfolded. And what was even worse about that, Phil, is that you were an absolutely heinous pass interference call from still having the ball with timeouts, or actually they'd used up all their timeouts, but they had time to go right down the field and tie this thing up, which that's a whole different conversation in and of itself, Phil. It's almost like a situation where unless it's the most absolutely obvious pass interference, you can't let a call like that essentially determine the outcome of a game on Sunday Night Football against 2 teams that may very well both be playoff teams. That is, to say the least, right down there with some of the worst calls we've seen all season involving any team.
Yeah, and it's just one of those ones that this is going to be a real, real tough film session for that offense. Defense, listen, if you want to take the other approach to it, I thought they did a really, really nice job. They were pretty banged up. They did not have Kirby Joseph. They did not have Terrion Arnold. But they made pretty well do with some of the other guys that are playing. Again, the front 7, maybe not getting home and getting the sacks that we would like. That's always been a concern here. But but I think the linebackers and I think the secondary did a pretty solid job. And again, we've been pretty solid up the middle. Now that Ali McNeil has been back, and those are things to feel good about. But at
And
the end of the day, when you struggle to score points, and it's something that we have not been accustomed to in scoring in single digits, that is really the story of the game, and what we need to figure out moving forward.
you called out the defense, so I'll follow you down this path for just a second, Phil. You mentioned the defense wasn't getting home. They weren't making Jalen Hurts' life difficult, I wouldn't say. But I will say, granted, you lose Lane Johnson for half of that football game. That's going to make things a little bit more difficult for the Eagles. But I will say this. I haven't seen a team defend the tush push quite as effectively over the course of a 60-minute football game than the Lions did. They were as effective at stopping that almost automatic picking up that short yardage first down than any team I've seen, which makes the whole theme of this episode even more frustrating.
Yeah, like I said, you hold the Eagles to 16 points at home. What other Lions game have we seen where we failed to score double digits?
It's been a
How
minute.
many times has Amon-Ra St. Brown targeted? And I think he finished the game with like 2 receptions. Um, it's
And a complete
one of those
non-factor in the second
games
half.
that, yeah, and it's one of those games that it just you're not ready for the script of when it happens, and I think the Lions just could not adjust when they got off script, and things were kind of going in the Eagles' favor.
So what puzzled me a little bit is if you look at the Lions rushing average, they averaged 3.5 yards a carry. So not good. And I can understand why on a macro level they would say, hey, this isn't working. We're feeling like we're getting behind the sticks a little bit. Let's try and make some magic happen through the air. Now, 21 rushing attempts on the night versus 37 passing attempts. They only completed 14 of those passes, so that is a career low for Jared Goff, and that's not even close. So this is a career stinker of a game. Throw it in the garbage and put it away, like in gymnastics, how you drop your lowest score. You drop your lowest score. I'm not going to spend all night harping on Jared Goff because nights like that do happen. It was just kind of a comedy of errors of all the other things that went amiss along with it. But what stood out to me a little bit, Phil, as I mentioned, the 3.5 yards per carry by the Lions. The Eagles themselves only averaged 3.7 yards a carry, so they were really not doing much better. The difference is that they attempted 19 more run plays than the Lions did, and I think that had a lot to do with them possessing the ball almost 12 minutes more than the Lions did, and that's keeping their defense a little bit fresher on the sidelines, and the Lions are feeling like they're playing uphill the entire night, even though the Eagles weren't having any real success running that football, but they were on the field all night. And even though they weren't finishing drives, they were having to settle for punts. They weren't making those decisions like the fourth down plays, which 0 for 5 on the night, more often than not going to get the job done. That at least gives you a puncher's chance. Why do you think the Lions were so quick to abandon the run game, given the fact that they weren't doing it much worse than Philadelphia was?
No, and that to me is really frustrating because I thought David Montgomery was pretty effective. As a little bit of a change up to everything that we were seeing with Gibbs.
Yeah, why are you
Um,
giving Gibbs the ball in the short yardage to go situations there?
yeah,
Montgomery's your guy for that.
yeah, and that's the thing that I found to be a little baffling because it seemed like we were starting to run a little better with him at times. Again, it's just like we know the reputation that Goff has about throwing in cold weather. I had my reservations when I saw him out there with 2 gloves, even if it's a comfort thing, like even if that makes him feel better. There's something about seeing a quarterback wearing 2 gloves when it's not snowing and 5 degrees out at Lambeau that you're like, I don't know. And
It was
the fact that,
45 degrees. If you can't
yeah,
survive a 60-minute football game, making all that money that you're making, maybe it's time to start reevaluating some life choices.
David Montgomery is the type of running back with his time in Chicago. He's a Midwest guy. He's the type of running back you want in these kind of games. He's the type of running back that thrives in these kind of games. And, they started to use Gibbs in the pass game, and he had a really nice game, but it was one of those things that, like, I think they should have went more to Gibbs in the screen game, and then when they would have had Montgomery in there, that would have been more the, 3rd and 3 kind of opportunities of having him run a little bit. But hey, listen, Sam Laporta, I think he does things so naturally and just looks very cool, calm, and collected when he's on the football field that maybe I didn't fully appreciate everything that he brought to this Lions offense from a blocking standpoint, from a receiving standpoint. He was missed. He was missed out there on Sunday Night Football.
And he's on
Whether it
injured
was
reserve. We will not see him until the second week of December at the earliest.
So, I know Brock Wright is probably among the top backup tight ends in the league, but to me, there was a big drop off there, and I think some of it, Brock Wright maybe might be a little bit of a better blocker, but we did not really get any production from him. I think he finished 2 receptions for 8 yards. So, I mean, those are numbers that Laporta would get in one play. So we missed that as well. So it's
And
a
it's
couple
not like
things.
Laporta's giving you the production that like Tucker Kraft was giving the Packers before he went down with an injury of his own, but still a very important part of this offense, even
Yeah.
without being so two tight ends set heavy that John Morton was back when he was calling plays. In a big game like this, like you said, Phil, perfectly, he was sorely missed out there.
He was. But yeah, to me, I once Goff looked like he was getting rattled, that would have been the call to, okay, we're gonna have to win this game with run game. We're gonna have to punt occasionally. We're gonna have to get Philadelphia to where our defense is stopping them, getting in positions. And if we got to kick field goals, we have to. And it didn't happen. And it's a missed opportunity. This was a game that I think if we played this one a little closer to the vest, maybe with a couple of other plays that we executed, ifs, ands, or buts, I know, but it felt like we could have at the end there pulled this one out.
What frustrates me the most, and I understand a lot of this is coach speak, but Dan Campbell is probably one of the more honest coaches, even with plenty of coach speak sprinkled in there, but you're definitely getting what's really on his mind more often than not when he does his media availabilities and what have you. But I still heard plenty of the reused and recycled, got to clean things up, we're close, da 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 da, stuff that you hear after almost every loss. And what I more or less kind of take exception to is all that stuff would be fine and great if you were just coming off 3 wins in a row, 4 wins in a row. You were due for a clunker of a game. It happened. There were some little errors here and there that were the difference between winning and losing the game, and you move on. What's a little bit more concerning to me is that, believe it or not, since the calendar flipped over to October a month and a half ago, the Lions have traded wins and losses ever since. They're
Yeah.
the most inconsistent they've been from a win-loss standpoint in 3 calendar years. So this whole, oh, we're close, we just got to clean a few things up, isn't ringing quite the same way because the context is so different now.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I understand we have a philosophy at how we build this roster. We draft, we re-sign the core, and we go from there. But again, a lot of this points back to not being nearly as aggressive as we needed to and filling these places that are now holes. And while we don't have a complete mash unit like we had last year with the defense, um, this is a team that, without a good week of practice and execution against the Giants on Sunday, um, who's no great shakes, that's a game that we need to win. This is something that's going south.
So you're kind of leading into my question without even knowing what that question is, Phil.
Oh,
Looking at
oh,
the final 7 games of the season, we're going to put it all on the line here. what needs to happen in these next 7 games, in your mind, for this thing to be a success or a colossal failure? How
The
do you
health,
how do you see this all shaken out?
this all boils down to the offensive line. This all boils down to the offensive line. We have not had the run game that we've needed to this year. The pass protection fell apart last night. We now have 2 teams that have faced the Lions and the Packers and the Eagles, and how they apply pressure a little bit differently, but both that have very, very strong defensive coordinators that have figured out a way to confuse and to rattle Jared Goff into having off days. When that happens, our offense falls apart. I have every confidence in our defense, no matter how hurt they've been. That core that we're sending out there, if they play their B plus, A minus game, is going to keep us in the game. It might not win the game because we're not getting the sacks or the turnovers, but it's at least enough to keep us in the game. I don't think they're getting beat, getting blown out in any of these games. But this all comes down to what that offensive line is capable of. And we know with the tackles, if they're fully healthy, what they can do. But this whole interior part of the offensive line, and Mahogany was really coming into his own, and I thought was doing a pretty fine job this season. Losing him, that has been an understated injury. There's a reason Awasika has been a backup in this league while he's been in the league. And then we just failed to address anything prior to the trade deadline, and I feel like we're now feeling that. So
And the
to me, it's the
writing,
offensive line.
yeah, and the writing was on the wall. I mean, look at the best defensive coordinators you faced so far this season. Jeff Hafley with Green Bay, loss, wasn't super competitive regardless of what the final score was. Steve Spagnuolo, Kansas City, wasn't that competitive of a game regardless of what the final score says. Minnesota, Brian Flores, same thing. Wasn't that competitive of a performance regardless of what the final score was. And now Vic Fangio last night. Not a good offensive effort by the Lions, even though the score was close the entire night. It never felt like the Lions were in control of that game. They never held the lead at any point in time over the course of the game. So that is concerning that they weren't picking up on some of these seemingly obvious trends with this offense, that they didn't go out and get help when the opportunity was there for it. My take on all this, Phil, is I heard Goff saying at his media availability that all their goals are still out there in front of them. And I say mathematically, yes. I think logically he's a little bit mistaken, because it's going to take a pretty epic collapse for the Eagles to hand this thing over. I think they'd have to all but lose out the rest of the way, and the Lions would basically have to run the table. So the 1 seed is pretty much not going to happen at this point. To win the division is still going to be tricky in and of itself. You haven't looked good against your 2 out of your 3 divisional opponents so far, one of which you played at home. And I don't think that what we saw from the Bears game week 2 is representative of who this Lions team actually is. The farther away we get from that, the more that kind of looks like a mirage. So the way I kind of see it, Phil, is for this thing to be salvaged and to give you the feeling of it being back on the tracks, so to speak, I think you got to win your next 3 games. You get 3 games at home in a row.
Yeah.
The Giants at home, the Packers at home on Thanksgiving. You have the opportunity to avenge that week 1 loss, and you get the Cowboys at home. They can score a lot of points, but your defense has been up to the challenge most nights, and you can score 2 against a not-so-great defense, which Dallas does not have a so-great defense. If you can win your next 3 games, and this team has proven time and again over the last handful of years that they can win games in bunches on your schedule. Now all of a sudden you're sitting at 9-4, flying out to play the Rams, and all of a sudden you're feeling a little bit better about the stretch run, knowing that Green Bay has a trickier schedule in these last 7 games they got some interesting games coming up here. They got to play the Bears twice. They got to play the Vikings twice. They got to go out to Denver. They play Baltimore, who's now reeling off a few wins in a row. Who knows what the Bears are going to do if what we've seen out of them is anything realistic. I think things are still up in the air as far as what's going to happen in this NFC North. But I think if you do any worse than 3-0 in these next 3 games, again, all of which are at home, I think you can talk about packing this thing up come the second Sunday in December when we play the Rams.
Well, it's one of those things that I think at its core, this is still a really, really good football team. The execution has been the sloppiest it's been of the Dan Campbell regime, really since that first year. So it's one of those things that I don't think we have the coaching staff in place. I don't think we necessarily have every unit the way that we've expected, the way that we will. While we've re-signed our core, and that core is going to be around for a long time, and certainly Dan and Brad will, be back in their positions next year. And I'm not hitting the panic button quite yet. I think there needs to be some fairly dramatic changes to either the coaching staff or some of these units. I think the way that they use the draft as well. Listen, I think Tyleik Williams has a very, very bright future. And I think he really showed something in some of those first few games that he played. But since DJ Reader and Ali McNeil have kind of come back and formed that tandem, he has been a ghost. Roy Lopez is now getting way more snaps than him. And that's your first round pick.
Where's
So,
Tesla,
yes,
the
it was
guy
great.
you traded all that draft capital away to go up and get?
Well, and that's the thing that's frustrating. You see him on the field, and it's like you start to get your hopes up that, oh, maybe this will be some gadget play that, he's going to be involved in, and, you can utilize some of his athleticism. So, again, something just hasn't been right all season long. So, we'll see what this is like. But to me, I think everything starts and ends with that offensive line. Again, I think the whole Morton thing on offense and the way that they game plan and scheme, I feel like if Dan Campbell is calling the plays, maybe there's almost too much on his plate, and we should not be here. So I don't know if that means a Mark Brunell or Tashard Choice, who's the running backs coach. Someone else probably needs to call plays at some point, but it's apparent that Morton and Campbell are probably and haven't been on the same page for a while.
It's important to note that Dan Campbell was never a play caller. He was a tight ends coach before he came over here. Sean Payton was always the play
Yeah.
caller. So I understand that that's the sexy thing, is to have the head coach call plays. But a lot of times, like you said, Phil, it doesn't always work. And I think we were kind of lulled into a false sense of positivity a week ago. But I think the more we are removed from that, it seems like it's more indicative of a crappy Commanders defense and an uninspired
Could be.
Commanders defense from a week ago. So the get right spot is coming up this coming Sunday, 1 o'clock, back at Ford Field on Fox. The New York Giants are coming to town. Only 2 wins on the season for the Giants. So on paper, it seems like a pretty easy get right game. The Lions, of course, no matter what over the last handful of seasons, are almost always a different team after a loss. It'd be nice if they were able to show that, hey, we can get right against a good team instead of beating up on the lowly Giants, who may very well be without Jackson Dart at quarterback heading into this week. What are you looking to see against the Giants at Ford Field this Sunday, Phil?
Yeah, so we'll have to see what the quarterback situation is there between Dart and Winston. Dart looks like he should have been the first overall pick with the way that he's commanded the Giants offense when he's been healthy. Cam Ward has looked like a little bit of a bust so far with the Titans. If it's Jameis, listen, we know what Jameis Ball is all like. That he will have some incredible throws, but he will also mix in plenty of turnover and mistakes. Maybe that would be something that would spark the defense a little bit. We got to see a little bit of life from the Lions running game, though. I know the Giants still have a pretty formidable um, defensive line in place. There were also reports, though, going into last week that I read today that Abdul Carter was literally asleep at practice. So that is not a good omen for that
That's your number 3
interim
overall
coaching
pick right
staff.
there, folks.
Yep, yep. So again, very Commanders like, where this is a team that they have some promising pieces in place, but I'm sure there are plenty of players that have already started to mail it in and think about golf season here. So I will feel comfortable with the Lions win by about 2 touchdowns, and the Giants are just shut down, maybe a single digit kind of game. Um, but to be honest, they just got to get a win. This is one that season's over if they lose this game.
And for the love of God, you can't get anybody hurt either. I mean, you got a
Yeah.
huge game coming up on Thanksgiving just 4 days later. This kind of has to be like one of those preseason type games where you hope you win, but you're really saving all your good stuff for that Packers game because that's a game that you really got to have. Of course, you got to
Yeah.
have the Giants game, and if you even give your C plus effort, it's a game you should be able to win. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But just for the love of God, don't get anybody hurt. You're listening to this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progard chopping it up with Phil Byrne. Glad you could be along with us as we dissect the bad, the ugly, and the little bit of good, I guess, from the Lions and Eagles game on Sunday Night Football. We look ahead to Week 12. And before we do that with our game picks, Phil, let's just kind of take the temperature of the NFC North. The Lions, as you wake up listening to this Kneecaps for Breakfast podcast, are sitting in third place in the NFC North behind the 7-3 Chicago Bears and the 6-3-1 Green Bay Packers. That tie seems like it's going to be just a big royal pain in the ass as we keep scoreboard watching the rest of the way here. And the Vikings are sitting at the bottom with some lackluster play at the quarterback position, to say the least. As you analyze what you see in the NFC North, Phil, what do you think as far as what your eyes tell you versus how things are going to shake out down the stretch?
Well, I think the Bears have been playing the best of any team in the division here over the last month. I will say, though, here is their upcoming schedule. Because I was taking a look at this. They are home against the Steelers. I would, again, not spoiling anything for if this is one of our picks, think they can beat the Steelers. Then they go to Philly. Then they go to Green Bay. They face Green Bay again in December on the 20th, a Saturday night game, and then they are at San Francisco. I think they're going to get a couple more losses in there before we see Chicago to close out the regular season. The issue with the Lions is we have to keep moving forward. We have to have this cap be at 4 losses on the season. Green Bay, how that kind of settles things on Thanksgiving could very well decide our fate as well. Minnesota has faded. They are not coming back. They got to figure something out with J.J. McCarthy and kind of what's going on there because I think they do have a lot of talent on that team. But even a guy like Justin Jefferson, if you have watched where his season has gone, has not had any quarterback play to get him the ball and have him be nearly as productive as many people thought. So again, I think they've got a wonderful coaching staff there. I think they've got some really good talent. They're not a playoff team right now as we're standing and looking at this.
Okay, Phil, let's get to our game picks, feeding right into what we were just talking about. The Minnesota Vikings travel to Lambeau Field, Packers laying 6.5. Who you got in this one?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Packers in this one. I don't think the Vikings, the way that they've been playing, is going to translate over onto the road. J.J. McCarthy, again, kind of dangerous sometimes running the ball. Passing, though, a whole different story. That passing game has yet to really take off with him as the quarterback there. And I know the Packers have not been, any great shakes here. Jordan Love banged up, so we'll have to see what his injury status is going to be. But I think even if it's Malik Willis, I think I would still take Green Bay at home.
And I'm still going to take Green Bay at home along with you, Phil, if nothing else, because of that defense. The Packers have actually lost 3 games in which they gave up 16 points or less. The Lions were obviously in that category on Sunday night, but the Packers have kind of utilized that as more or less a body of work over the course of the season. I like the Packers to be good winners at home in that one. Next game on the list, the Indianapolis Colts are traveling to Arrowhead Stadium to take on the struggling all of a sudden Kansas City Chiefs, who are laying 3.5 points at home. Colts, who are looking good in the AFC South. Chiefs, who are in a similar position to the Lions that are currently, as of this morning, on the outside looking in. What do you think of this Week 12 matchup?
I am going to favor the Colts in this one. I just don't think the Chiefs have enough of a run game. I think they're way too unbalanced on offense. Defense, not bad. But I just think that Chiefs magic is gone, and maybe they're going to find a couple of wins down the stretch here. I don't think it will be this game. I think the Colts are looking like they're going to be a potential 1 or 2 seed over in the AFC and easily clinch that division here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Colts and the points here because even though Daniel Jones has looked like he's kind of turned into more of a mere mortal as the Colts quarterback, turning the ball over a little bit, fighting through a little bit of adversity, something's not quite right with the Kansas City Chiefs. And all of a sudden, Arrowhead Stadium's not looking like the house of horrors that we've known it to be over the last half decade or so. I'm not saying that Indianapolis wins this game outright, but 3.5 dogs on the road, I'll take those 3.5 here in this one. Last game on our selection is the Sunday Night Football matchup, and it's going to be a good one between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the LA Rams, who are laying 6.5 at home. Important to note that with the Rams' victory over the Seahawks this past weekend, John M. Stafford himself now has a winning record as an NFL quarterback when you blend his time with the Lions up with his time with the Rams. He is now above 500 for the first time in his NFL career. Rams laying 6.5.
Give me the Rams. Wow, that's a heck of a stat there, Vince. Stat of the day.
There you go. And I'll take the Rams again. I sound like a broken record, but the Rams were my pick preseason to make a lot of noise in the NFC, and so far they are living up to that billing. And Tampa Bay, even though they kind of went tit for tat with the Buffalo Bills, they look like they're missing a step in the equation as well.
I think they still win that division, though. Falcons, they're gone. Saints, of course, have never been in the race, and I don't think the Panthers have enough to keep things going.
Absolutely not. That's a cut and dry race. We are definitely not in a cut and dry race, so you're definitely going to want to tune into the Lions, and you're definitely going to want to tune into Kneecaps for breakfast the rest of the way. That is all we've got for you on this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. We appreciate you trudging through the mud with us on this Lions-Eagles recap.
A lot of mud.
Hopefully it's brighter days ahead as we head into 3 straight home games. You're not going to want to miss Phil and I as we make it all happen here on Kneecaps for Breakfast. For Phil Byrne across the way, Vince Progar saying good morning, go Lions, forward on the field, over and out.